Just to give you a little bit of background, more than 3 years ago, New Fortress Energy and their subsidiary Delaware River Partners appeared before the Gibbstown Greenwich Township Planning and Zoning Board. And many of our organizations got involved in the fight against Dock 1 and the original iteration of Gibbstown Logistics Center back in 2017. But in 2016, in that township building, New Jersey Sierra Club and Delaware Riverkeeper Network were there, and we found out about the plans to redevelop an old DuPont munitions facility. It was over 1,000 acres, and the place that they wanted to redevelop was right up against the riverfront. And that's because they wanted to build a new deepwater port. At that deepwater port, they said they were going to be bringing in lots of dry cargo, things like bananas, fruit, cars, roll on, roll off, they call it. And they were going to develop a dock there, get rid of the old dilapidated dock, build a new dock there and have warehouses and trucks coming in and out, and then shipping and receiving those goods. They also were going to include liquefied cargo. Now, not liquefied natural gas, but what's called natural gas liquids or liquid hazardous gases. And those we were opposed to. We do not want more fracking. We don't want more pollution from the development of natural gas in Pennsylvania or anywhere. This would be coming from mostly the Marcellus Shale, where most of the natural gas liquids are coming from to the East Coast today. And so we also did not want environmentally a new terminal to be developed. We have many in the area, not all of them were fully up to capacity. They were looking for business, and we did not think that additional dredging of the river, redevelopment of a site that largely over the 20 to 25 years that had laid fallow had turned back into a natural habitat, over 1,000 acres of wetlands, for instance, there. And really the people in Gibbstown, the little community right up against this old DuPont, what was called the Rapano site, had really not experienced in recent years any sort of industrial activity there. So we thought this was not a good idea environmentally, and also in terms of the impacts of truck traffic and, for the people who live there, and then also to have more big ships on the river. So we did not prevail. We participated in the public process, and they went ahead and got their approvals from New Jersey and Army Corps, the other approvals that they needed, and they are pretty much substantially complete in terms of building the Dock 1 for the natural gas liquids and the other cargo. Then, back in 2017, they had floated the idea, Delaware River Partners and New Fortress Energy, of building in ship traffic ability to handle liquefied natural gas. And the people in the town and the mayor at the time said, no, we don't want that, it's too dangerous. So they supposedly dropped it, or so we thought. But now we found out through Freedom of Information Act requests, information from people who got in touch with us from Western PA, and a lot of different feelers that we had out in the community from our various organizations, we found out that they actually were planning to bring liquefied natural gas to this facility, and they were keeping it well under wraps. They didn't want anyone to know about this because they knew it would be controversial. There are no liquefied natural gas export facilities in the Delaware River watershed or in New Jersey. And this would be the first for that. So we found out that back in 2017, when they said they dropped it, they actually filed a letter of intent with the U.S. Coast Guard and asking for permission in order to move the ships to move liquefied natural gas. They also met with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who we believe have jurisdiction over this project, to see whether or not they could get out of FERC jurisdiction. And that was in 2017. And then in 2018, they met twice, again, with FERC and with New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. All of this was going on behind closed doors. And we think that probably what Delaware River Partners and New Fortress Energy, who is a huge conglomerate run by a hedge fund, we think that they thought they were going to get away with it. They were going to escape federal jurisdiction. They were not going to have to jump through too many hoops, and the public wasn't ever going to find out about it. Well, we did find out, so we started yelling. And once it was exposed, finally, at the first public hearing where they were going to consider this Dock 2, They would have to build a second dock in order to bring the liquefied natural gas in and ship it out. Finally, that came before the Delaware River Basin Commission in an unusually quickly called meeting, public hearing. We went there and it was finally admitted to the public by the DRBC that this was the plan, that they were going to try to bring LNG in by truck and or rail if they ever got their permits from the federal government to move it by rail. It's not legal now. And then ship it out, transload it onto ships and ship it out down the Delaware River. So our concerns are many, and you're going to hear from representatives tonight from organizations that cover different aspects of it. But the main, we have a problem because even though we were able to dig out these details through right to know requests, open public records requests, FOIAs, we were able to expose this. There's still a lot of information that we just don't know. It's fuzzy. On one hand, when you look at the Gloucester County Route 44 bypass, which they would need to build in order to bring the trucks in the quantity that they want to, they say it's 1,650 trucks a day. When you look at the Army Corps application, it says 360 trucks a day. Look, what's the truth? We can't get the answer to these in writing to the agencies. Each agency seems to have a different set of information, and frankly, it looks like Delaware River Partners and New Fortress Energy is making it up as they go along in order to please whoever they're talking to. So, I'm going to give you just a few facts so you can kind of get the lay of the land, and then each of us are going to go as quickly as we can. We lost a lot of time at the beginning trying to make this PowerPoint work. I really apologize for that. So it would, if they build this second dock, okay, dock 1 is pretty much done. That has one berth for one ship. Not good, but a confined, limited activity. No liquefied natural gas. The second dock would have 2 more ship berths, so they'd be tripling, basically, the activity that can occur there. It would provide navigational access and mooring and loading equipment for 2 ships up to 173 cubic meters in capacity, and would be located just downriver of where the old dock was. That's right across the river from Tinicum Township. It's also 3.7 miles away from Paulsboro, 1.24 miles from that Pennsylvania side, 2.73 miles away from Chester, PA, an environmental justice community that is clobbered day in and day out, because they disproportionately bear the environmental degradation of many environmentally destructive projects, air and water quality problems. It's about 10 miles from Philadelphia, but only 1.95 miles from Philadelphia Airport. So all of this region, and you're going to hear from Fred Millar, our expert, about what is the danger zone that comes with these. And you'll find out all of these things, all of these places, all of these people, including the small community of Gibbstown, which 75 of those residents are only 200 feet away from the property. And many of the residences are actually adjoining the property and only 100 feet away, their backyards. We have a daycare center there. There's a school there. There's all sorts of public buildings, churches. The little community of Gibbstown is right up against this facility. And then finally, it would require the dredging of an additional 45 acres of river. And you're going to hear from one of our representatives tonight about what those environmental impacts are to species and to water quality. And then finally, just to give a little bit of foreshadowing about how big this project can get, no matter what they're saying the size is right now. This company is so far-reaching that its subsidiary applied to the federal government, the Pipeline Hazardous and Materials Safety Administration, for a permit, a special permit, to get permission to move liquefied natural gas by rail. They're building a liquefied natural gas plant in Wyalusing Township and Bradford County, Pennsylvania, in the shale fields in the Marcellus Shale. And they want to load it onto trucks and bring it here, but they also are trying to get permission to put it on rail and rail it here. Right now, it is not legal to move liquefied natural gas on the nation's railways. If they get their approval, it will open up all of the nation's railways to this highly explosive and dangerous liquefied natural gas. And you'll hear more from Fred Millar about that. But that project, that permit, is in process right now. Everybody commented on it, and we're waiting to hear from PIMSA, the federal government, if they're going to approve that. So that can make this project even bigger. So finally, I'd just like to, at this point, turn it over to individuals, and we're going to real quickly run through some of the various impacts that come with the activities that they're talking about doing there. So first, I'd like Jeff Tittle to come up from New Jersey Sierra Club, and he's going to talk about Gibbstown site issues, some labor issues, and some of the federal context that this project is sitting in.
Thank you, Jeff Tittle, New Jersey Sierra Club, and I just want to start out and say that we've been involved with LNG issues for a very long time, and what you have to understand is this is a very volatile and dangerous chemical. What you do is you take natural gas, and under pressure and cooling, you have to compress that gas down to a liquid form that you can then transport it. So in this case, you're taking 2 billion gallons of natural gas and compressing it to 3.5 million gallons. So whatever gets compressed can go the other way. Part of the problem is that you're talking about having to keep it cool at minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. To think about how cold that has to be. So if there's a leak, what happens is it starts to vaporize and warms, and it keeps spreading. It will revolumize if the leak is allowed to extend. And we have seen that happen. Just recently, there was a train in Florida where they had a derailment, and it broke open and it leaked and it exploded. And that's what happens because the cold gas goes out, can hit a spark, and then blow up. In Cleveland, many years ago, an LNG tank went up and leveled 40 blocks of the city, and that was a small leak. And an LNG ship had a small leak and almost lost the entire ship because of it. So it wasn't for the heroic efforts of the people on it. So I just want to kind of understand that. And so we have been involved, and I want to just throw a couple of pieces out there because why this is so important now. I mean, one, we're talking about climate change and the pollution from fracking and needing to get the green energy. So 7 years ago, Governor Christie stopped an LNG port off the coast of New Jersey. 5 years ago, Governor Cuomo did another one. Sierra Club in Delaware and the state of Delaware went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to stop a one down in Greenwich Township. And the reason is because these facilities are dangerous. The Department of Energy says that these facilities should be sited in rural areas, that they shouldn't be closer than 2 miles from the nearest community, because God forbid, if there's ever an accident or explosion, you want to take care of people and you want to make sure that you have a safety zone. And so that is a critical part of this, and that's not here. You have a community right there. The other serious concern that we have is the shipping into the site and out of the site. They're going to be taking in 1,640 trucks. I did some math based on the typical LNG truck, which carries about 1,500 gallons. It'd be more like 2,200 trucks a day, I think, just based on the back of the envelope math. So whatever numbers they're giving, it's like every day it's a different number, but I think it's going to keep getting larger and larger. And how are they going to get it from Bradford and Western PA to here, to down the road? Are they going to, they're not flying it in, they're going to truck it in for now, and who knows what they may try later. So you're talking about the potential of a couple of thousand trucks a day coming into the Delaware Valley, coming from Western PA, down the Turnpike, Route 80, coming through, crossing the Turnpike on 295 and coming down to Gibbstown, coming through the Commodore Barrett Bridge, or potentially coming in from 76 and coming right over the Ben Franklin Bridge. We don't know because they haven't identified where it is. And if one of these trucks were to have an accident, hit a bridge, overturn, it could lead to, again, a potential loss of life and tremendous amount of damage just from one of these trucks, because they're basically bombs on wheels. And so, that's a serious part of it. And that's why, again, the Department of Transportation needs to be involved in looking at it in the state and federal, because we need to know what kind of routes they're looking at and where they're coming from. What are their safety measures? What are they going to be doing? And how are they going to let the towns know when these trucks are coming through? Because you need hazmat crews, you need other things to be available in case something happens. So you have to think about that we're dealing with a highly dangerous and explosive chemical, compressed gas coming in. And so in other parts of the country where we have these types of facilities, and I'll use Boston as an example, when the LNG tankers come in to Boston, they close Logan Airport because they're afraid that there could be an accident or a terrorist or the plane. They put the National Guard on the Charles River bridges and they close them because they're afraid a car could go off or somebody could drop a hand grenade or something. So it causes a major disruption in a very busy city of Boston, and that's why they're getting out of the LNG business. They don't want it anymore because of this. And so when you think about this area, if a tanker is in here, you know, does the Delaware Memorial Bridge get closed? Does the Commodore Barry Bridge? If you're wanting to take a flight, you know, go see relatives in Florida, does the, you know, does the airport stop taking planes off as long as those tankers are in the river? And so, you know, there's really a lot of issues here, and that's why the Coast Guard, Homeland Security have to be very much involved, and so should the state's Department of Homeland Security. They should be talking to DEP instead of DEP looking the other way on permitting because of those safety issues. And again, we have a very large, we have a river with a large volume of navigable traffic. You've got barges coming up bringing all kinds of materials. You've got tankers. You know, if the Olympus oil tanker, you know, happened with LNG, it would be a catastrophe. You know, we're talking about trains. If the train accident that happened in Paulsboro was a train carrying LNG, it wouldn't have been all those people getting sick and going to hospital. It could have meant the end of Paulsboro. And it's not, I'm not trying to, you know, overplay this. These are very serious issues. And, you know, there's a lot of safety issues that are involved. There's health issues from the gas itself because it has radon in it and everything, you know, and besides the methane and chromium and a whole bunch of other things. But this is a bigger issue than people realize. And we need this administration in Trenton actually listen and get involved in this and not just think about, oh, the owner of it is a big Democratic, you know, fundraiser and he's helping to do the DNC convention in Milwaukee. No, we have to come and start really working with the communities and with the people here and looking at permits from all the different aspects, not just the environmental, but also from the safety standpoint. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
That I want to thank each and every one of you for being in the room tonight. There's a lot to learn about this project. As Tracy said, my name is Doug O'Malley. I'm the Director of Environment New Jersey. And part of the reason we're here right now is this regulatory process has been clear as Delaware River mud, and we have agencies that are working to railroad these approvals through without having public forums like this. The local impacts are ones that haven't been discussed as much. And we clearly, when we're looking at the impacts of this proposed LNG project, there's obviously a huge climate impact. There's a huge impact on the Delaware River. There's an impact from public safety. But through the permitting process right now, we haven't had a lot of discussion on impacts in the direct community and in surrounding communities. And one of the biggest holes that we've seen not addressed is the impact on air pollution from this project. And I think, as Tracy mentioned, you know, we need to look at you know, this and the totality of the impacts on communities, not only in Gibbstown, but on both sides of the river. So right across the river is the Exelon Eddytown power plant. And up and down the river, there is a legacy of fossil fuel and refinery projects that, if not right in the community, are close by. Obviously, the Rapano project is a Superfund site. So when we think about the impacts to the environment and to the public health for the surrounding communities, we need to look at the broader context. One of the broader contexts is on air quality, as I was referencing. Currently, Gloucester County has a big fat F from the American Lung Association for air quality. Guess what the rating is for Camden? F as well. There are 31 ozone alert days for Camden. There are 18 for Gloucester. And obviously, ozone alert days are the most prevalent during the summer months. Right now, we've already had a discussion on what is the actual number of truck traffic we're going to see. In some permits, we're talking about 1,600 trucks, unique trucks per day. The total travel is above that, up to 8,000. So when we think of the impact just from a quality of life, from, you know, anyone that lives close by, that's not only going to be a lot more trucks, it's also going to be a lot more localized air pollution in those communities. We've already talked a little bit on how those trucks are going to get there. They're not going to magically appear from Bradford down to Gibbstown. They're going to be on our highways. And for anyone that's been stuck in 295 traffic, you know that which probably some of you were tonight, you know that obviously accidents are a fact of life. And that's why, for the most part, when we are talking about incredibly dangerous chemicals, we don't put them right in our communities. As Jeff said, when we're looking and talking about liquefied natural gas, this is something that needs the utmost security. One of the other impacts in air pollution we're not looking at is that this isn't just about truck traffic in the surrounding community. None of the permits have looked at the impact from diesel equipment, the venting of liquefied natural gas or NGL. That has not been part of the permitting process so far, or discussion of the impacts of flaring off the gas into the construction and operation of a potential proposed small capacity, and I say that in quotes, small capacity natural gas liquefier on site. These are obviously impacts that need to be looked at, not only for the impact on Gibbstown and the surrounding community, but also for Gloucester County and also for the airshed for the surrounding communities. One of the reasons why the American Lung Association ranks don't change drastically county by county, of course, is there's not a wall between counties. So localized air pollution impacts are going to have the biggest impact, right in a community, but obviously that travels. There's more local impacts to talk about here, but I want to kind of keep things moving because there are obviously a lot more impacts to talk on. But I did just want to reference that when we're thinking about this process, the fact that there has not been a public process, there has barely been a public hearing that was given literally 5 days notice by the Delaware River Basin Commission, that is a reminder that our public process is broken. When we're trying to hide facts from the public, and I wanted to thank specifically the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and the New Jersey Sierra Club for being at those meetings several years ago. Because anytime government agencies are hiding a permitting process, it usually means something is wrong.
Thank you, Doug.
Think about the Delaware River. It's made a huge comeback over the last 50 years. Going back, we had raw sewage discharges, slaughterhouse discharges. We put protections in place to restore this body of water. The Delaware River Planning Commission, the Clean Water Act, and we've had a complete transformation of this river. It is a huge source of drinking water for communities. We think about it as a national treasure. There's recreational, economic opportunities that are associated with the river. It's an excellent fishing resource for those that like to get out there on the banks. This proposed LNG facility puts all of that at risk. Just consider the dredging activities alone in the construction of this extra port. The dredging is to allow deeper vessels. When you have deeper vessels, they're bigger ships. We're talking about more wildlife and fish strikes as the big ships come in. The big ships also carry a higher risk for greater disaster. Bigger ships means more fuel, bigger potential risks for disaster. The dredging modifies the river bottom. It redistributes silt. It's going to cause problems for habitat. For habitat. Mussels, which are critical for filtering and creating a healthy system, are also impacted. They get reburied. This dredging activity also resuspends toxins that were buried on the river bottom before. They're not a problem now, but when you start scooping and stirring, things that were not toxic or at the bottom of the river are suddenly resuspended into the river. Dredging noise activity also disrupts wildlife and local communities. And then we're also thinking about when you scoop up what's toxic on the bottom, you have these dredge spoils. Now we got to deal with these on land. We have to have a place for them. So beyond the super local and ecological impacts, building an LNG port facility has greater negative impacts to the region. By allowing for exports of natural gas, we're increasing the prices. We're opening up LNG to a global market. So we're just going to be paying more for it when we're using it here. We're just doubling down on an investment on fossil fuels. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but you might feel like you're already feeling the effects. You are. Science is showing us we're having higher temperatures, more algae blooms, more localized flooding in more places that we've never seen flooding before. So we are already feeling the impacts. Building this facility, we're going to have the local communities are paying the price. It's paying for the health, we're paying for the environmental damage, we're paying for the economic costs, and we're not getting any of the benefits. So I do want to get to the expert, Fred. I'm going to keep it short.
So natural gas liquids, the name is confusing. We were just talking about liquefied natural gases, now we're talking about natural gas liquids, LNG, NGLs, there's also liquid hazardous gases, LHG, people sometimes say liquid propane gas, LPG, it's all very confusing. Natural gas liquids Here we're talking about ethane, propane, butane, and similar things like that. For those who are chemically inclined, natural gas is mostly methane, which is one carbon atom saturated with hydrogen atoms. Ethane, you get 2 carbon atoms saturated. Propane, it's 3. Butane, it's 4, etc. What that means, with the more carbon, it packs more of a punch. It's also heavier. So these things are also explosive. They are also hazardous. Unlike methane, they don't dissipate into the air as readily. If there's a breach of containment for natural gas liquids, ethane and propane, for example, will hug the ground rather than fly into the air. This makes them a different beast to deal with from the standpoint of protecting against hazards and planning for emergencies. Natural gas liquids are part and parcel of the fracking economy. So what comes out of the ground when you frack for natural gas is not just gas. It's also these natural gas liquids, ethane, propane, butane, etc. It's all in a mix. There's nobody went underground and arranged them properly, so they're all in different places. So it all comes out together. And what happens upstream is when you're doing fracking, you get this all out of the ground, then you take it to what's called a fractionation plant. Separates out the different products into their different containers, basically, and then can sell them separately. So what's been happening since the fracking boom began in western Pennsylvania and northern Pennsylvania, is in addition to getting all this fracked gas, they're also getting these additional products, and they're like, hey, we need to do something with this. You know, these are potentially valuable commodities, and we need to get them to market. But guess what? America doesn't use enough of them. So what they're trying to do now is they're trying to get them overseas. And we've seen this in Pennsylvania at the Marcus Hook terminal, which is, if you look at your map down here, it's basically right across the river from Gibbstown. Thank you, Tracy. So I'm just going to go over here and Gibbstown, Marcus Hook, right? Clean Air Council has for years been working to try to keep the Marcus Hook facility in line, and in fact we took an appeal of an air permit relating to emissions from natural gas liquids at the site because Sunoco Energy Transfer, the operator of the facility, was building it bit by bit and saying, oh, we only have this one natural gas liquids project. Oh, now we only have this other one natural gas liquids project. Oh, we have only this other one. And I am struck by how similar that is to what's happening here. We were able to take them to court, and we actually won in front of a judge in January saying that indeed this was improperly broken up into little pieces. So I am struck again by just how similar the tactics are here. Hiding what the whole project is, not disclosing and breaking it up so it seems smaller than it actually is. Natural gas liquids are dangerous. They are part of fracking, and this as an export project is part of selling America's fossil fuel resources overseas, and we don't need that. And that is my time. Thank you very much.
Yes, hello, Jocelyn Sawyer with Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action New Jersey. I also will keep it brief, as the other folks have said so much of what, also I just want to emphasize, which is that this is not about this one project. This is a piece of one of the biggest fossil fuel build-outs, really, that we have ever seen. As Alex was just explaining so clearly, it's about creating new markets for gas because fracking is not profitable in the U.S. It's been so well documented that it's not an industry that's making money. And so the executives are looking for ways to make sure that they can keep lining their pockets and keep selling gas and have excuses to keep on fracking and keep on expanding the drilling. And we are in a climate emergency right now. The science has been so clear that what we do, the path that we choose in the next 10 years will have huge consequences on just how bad the crisis is that we are then facing later on. And the next 10 years are so critical. And methane, which is released even just in the fracking process, even when gas is not even burned, methane is 87 times as potent a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, but it's really that next 10-year window is what's absolutely critical. So what we need is to be banning fracking, stopping fracking, not going forward with projects that will expand fracking and continue to get in the way of bringing a clean energy economy to New Jersey. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Justin.
One of the things we need to do is get pictures in people's heads of what can happen when very dangerous liquefied gases go up, okay? And it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it can be really, really bad. And so people need to kind of get pictures in their heads of what an accident looks like, an accidental release or a terrorist release. And by the way, everything I said tonight will apply about releases will apply to terrorism just as well as to accidental releases. And you guys might not realize that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has designated the Philadelphia area generally and a 10-mile buffer zone around the city of Philadelphia as a high-threat urban area for terrorism. So that means that if there's a terrorist attack in Gibbstown, there's not going to be worldwide media that says terrorist attack Tinicum. They're going to say terrorist attack Philadelphia. Right? Okay, so this is, in terms of the pictures of the accident, this is one from, and somebody's got to keep my time on this too, because I'll get lost. This is an explosion of what happened in Crescent City, Illinois. This is propane now. The LNG industry is often comparing LNG to propane and saying, well, propane gets accepted out in the U.S. Rail system and on U.S. highways. Why not LNG? You know, they're LNG and LPG. They're not too different, right? Well, look, this is a propane explosion where 10 rail cars derailed in this town, and many of them released their contents. They had enormous fireball powering over this little community here, and then 3 BLEVE explosions, boiling liquid, expanding vapor explosions. That's something that the experts used to think LNG is not going to do a BLEVE. But now we've had 2 truck accidents in Spain in which they in fact did BLEVE. So we know that
How many people were killed in that?
those were remote accidents. There was nobody killed. They were just the drivers, I think. There were not a lot of people killed. Nobody was killed here because after the trains derailed, there was such a hell of a noise that they evacuated everybody, and only 66 people got injured, including several firefighters. But the property damage downtown was extensive. Now let's try the next one. This is what the industry would like you to think about LNG. It's just all these clean trucks, you know, clean energy and beautiful new trucks. These are trucks that have to be very, very heavily insulated with 2 shells, an inner shell and an outer shell, with 12 inches of insulation in between. And that's because LNG has to be kept at minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. And then what I'd like to be able to do is explain what happens when one of these trucks releases its contents, or a rail car, or any other kind of release. Let me stay on that for a minute. If it releases, the LNG as a liquid will not explode. As a liquid, it's not toxic or anything. It's very, very cold, and nobody can touch it. What it will do is embrittle the roadside or the bridge or the fire trucks or anything that's close by. I mean, earlier people said it expands 620 times greater than the volume of the tank car, which means you get this giant dense vapor cloud, and it will hug the ground, and it will go downhill or downwind into your community a long way. And one thing we have to talk about, one thing we have to teach American citizens about is, well, it's important to know what the distances are. How far downwind into our community can an LNG cloud go? If it's not ignited right away, in other words, at the point of release, what can happen? And the industry basically says, oh, it's non-toxic, non-flammable, and will not explode. It turns to a vapor and rises and dissipates. It's like, what, it goes to heaven? Yeah. I mean, this is very friendly stuff, right? Look, the fact is, what they don't want to talk about is this dense vapor cloud that can go into your community. Let's try the next one. I also want to show you, though, a picture of the federal research early on about fires. What happens on water if you put LNG on water. And this is about a truck-sized volume, 10,000 gallons of LNG. And then you light it, and the fire is extremely high and extremely hot. This one is 250 feet high, and you can't put it out. Once LNG gets started, you get released, you can't deal with it. You can't cap the release. You can't deal with it. The only thing you can do is evacuate, say, the federal documents. So the second thing to mention about this is that the federal government was just beginning in 1970s to try to understand what an LNG behaved like, what an LNG release behaved like. And one of the main conclusions was, well, it certainly will put out a very hot and very high fire, but there's a lot of uncertainty because we don't have the models to really describe very much about this. I mean, everybody is catching up on LNG. LNG is being put out there without a very clear understanding of what it will do, except in very vague ways. So let's try the next one. Yeah, the key findings from this, and let's just go ahead because I've already said what this slide is about. Now, this is another truck accident from one of the ones in Spain. In 2002 and 2011, there were 2 LNG truck accidents in Spain, and where it burned and then exploded, and the missiles were thrown 200 feet. So, you know, the Bellevue means the whole tank just blasts apart, and missiles go a long ways. Let's try the next slide, please.
What does that stand for again?
Pardon?
Levy?
BLEVE, boiling liquid expanding vapor exploded. That's the technical word for it. Now I get very disturbed when I read what kind of training is being given to our emergency responders around the country, because our emergency responders are being fed a whole bunch of stuff, especially pictures and training materials from the federal government, by the way, as well as from industry, that really downplay the risks. Look at this. Fire people are being encouraged to go up to a fire of LNG. Now, you could do that if you've got a tiny cupful, maybe, but in any serious accidental release, you don't want your firefighters anywhere close. In fact, you want them to the federal guidance document, the emergency response guidebook called the Orange Book, says you should evacuate. Your initial evacuation in the first 20 minutes should be a mile, and then you have to rethink. Well, you know what our fire chiefs are doing? Our fire chiefs, when they're faced with LNG accidents, are being cautious. And one of our most recent LNG releases was in Plymouth, Washington, where Fire Chief Lonnie Click was in a different town, but he drove to the accident to take incident command of this situation. He later said in a public meeting in Washington, well, I didn't know a thing about LNG before this accident happened in the next county. I didn't know a thing about LNG. And he said, I got my LNG 101 as I was driving my truck towards the accident a half a mile away. When he got to the accident, Lonnie took a look at the situation, and he said, well, the guidance document says evacuate a mile. There's a lot of uncertainties here. He doubled it to 2 miles. And this is in a rural area, basically, okay? Plymouth, Washington, you probably never heard of. And it's a small town. And so imagine trying to do a 2-mile radius evacuation in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area like this. That would be completely out of the question. So, but we do need to be talking about how to talk to people about evacuations, because that is what is needed. Not trying to suppress the LNG fire with training your firefighters. That is not where the action is here. Next slide, please. So this is another federal research project where they were trying to understand. They were trying to let loose some LNG and then see whether the cloud. I told you the cloud is 600 times bigger than the liquid, right? Enormous cloud. So this LNG release was surrounded by 30-foot high walls, and the point of the research was to help the industry figure out if you put walls around your LNG facility, vapor barriers they call them, could that hold up the cloud and give people more of a chance to escape? Well, it does hold it up temporarily, and what you see here is eventually the cloud just overtops the wall. So if you have a facility in Gibbstown or anywhere else, like we have in many places around the country, where the industry goes to FERC, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they get permission to site these facilities now on very small sites. And one of the ways they get that permission is to say, Well, we're gonna mitigate the risk by putting walls around the.
Where is the
around-
wall in that picture?
Okay, they actually get credit for doing that in the federal regulations. So we don't know how much credit, because all this goes on in secret meetings between the industry and the firm. They start meeting a year before a facility even gets proposed or applied for. They start meeting to keep the federal agency that as kind of a staff people for the industry. Here's how you can build your plant to fit within our regulations and get your siting in smaller and smaller areas. Any urbanized area like this should worry about how small is the site going to be. This plant was in 1987. This test was in 1987. When the industry got to look at this test, which is for their benefit to try to say whether vapor barriers would work or not, one industry guy said, "Well, in the testing, it just overtopped the walls, didn't it?" And in other words, the industry got such bad news that they didn't do it. They didn't promote any more testing of this like this. So we've had very little testing. There's been no federal test where they actually put out flammable models downwind to see how far the clouds would go. In this test, the monitors are only 250 meters downwind. They went way past that. So you need to put monitors way downwind. These clouds can go way downwind. Professor Havens, it was mentioned earlier that people in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania have defeated some recent LNG proposals, right? Because people are scared about it. And in fact, we've had a couple of decades of that going on the East Coast. Professor Fay in Boston and Professor Havens have put out warnings about how if you bring in LNG ships into East Coast harbors, you have to have a danger zone of concern 1 to 3 miles. And that's the kind of communities we're presented with in those days. The good news is these communities have defeated LNG proposals all up and down the East Coast, with the exception of Coal Point, Maryland, and all up and down the West Coast. People just raised hell when LNG facilities were proposed, but because they had this kind of information from Professor Havens and others. And so, let me see if I probably have a slide that describes this a little bit. Well, let me just say the core question here about facilities is how far away is far enough? Congress, as was mentioned earlier, says seek remote siting. But LNG trucking and rail brings LNG right into your communities. I mean, this is only about siting. Congress has only been concerned about siting. We didn't have a whole lot of domestic LNG transportation. So when I mentioned about the proposal back in 2004, the proposed LNG facilities were import facilities. We were going to bring in LNG from other countries, Qatar and Algeria and so forth, and Venezuela. And so the proposal from the industry were to build a lot of facilities on the West Coast, a lot of facilities on the East Coast. Many of those have been defeated in various ways, and then a lot on the Gulf Coast. And hit the next slide, please. But once a whole bunch of those were rejected, look at the pattern. In 2018, and this is again, these are federal maps. In 2018, these are now the proposed LNG facilities in the United States, all in the Gulf Coast mainly, all in the Gulf Coast. Why? As the industry says, well, it's a friendlier regulatory climate down there. And the governors down there just say, come on down, boys. Louisiana and Texas, we welcome y'all, come on down. And that's a natural sacrifice area. So in any case, I'm just trying to give you the idea that there's been a lot of successful rejection of LNG facilities because of the safety and the terrorism risk. Hit one more slide, let's see. I want to show you that local communities are trying to put together their own maps of what the distances could look like. This is in Tacoma, Washington. I know you can't read the slide, but I just wanted to say it's an illustration of where there's an LNG facility proposed right here in Tacoma. And so the Puyallup tribe got their GIS people to put up a map with the populations listed. These are particular listings of the populations in particular areas and neighborhoods around the LNG plant. And they did danger zones of 1 mile, 2 miles, and 3 miles. Now, we don't have a good science that says an LNG cloud can go for 3 miles. And one reason we don't is that neither the industry does studies and the federal government does studies, and they both keep them secret. The industry did a study in Florida of an LNG facility there. I'm sorry, of the rail line that they were running up and down on the Florida East Coast Railway. Just a little regional airline is doing a pilot project. Let's just run some LNG and see if after a couple of years, if we don't have a disaster, we can say no disaster yet, it must be safe. So they did a quantitative risk assessment for the transportation up and down, and they gave it to the Federal Railroad Administration. The company won't produce the results of that, and the FRA won't honor by FOIAs. They gave a local activist there in Florida who's a good hellraiser. They gave her, when she filed an FOIA, they gave her a copy of the document with every single data point redacted. Complete. I mean, is that shameless or what? That was from the Federal Railroad Administration, and the federal government recently put out about this special permit that you heard earlier. The federal government put out a draft environmental assessment about the special permit to the New Fortress Energy affiliated Energy Transfer Solutions company that wanted to open up the whole U.S. rail system to LNG with a special permit. And when the feds put out their draft environmental assessment recently, they said, well, it's true, we do concede that LNG can go a long ways into your communities, but you know, it's very difficult to do the calculations. We're just not going to do it. They won't put in their environmental assessment how far LNG can go, which is the absolute key thing to know. And so, of course, what I'm trying to encourage you guys to do is to take courage and take that people in other places have really pressed on this issue of how far distance is safe enough, and done very vivid kinds of ways. And I know, look, I'm honored to be in this group. You guys have done so much good work here.